Hello, welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today I am here with Ken Lozito. Ken is the author of 14 science fiction and fantasy novels across 4 series and has been independently publishing his books for over 4 years, going from hobbyist with potential to a full-blown author career. What started out as a love of stories has turned into a full-blown passion for writing them, and it's clear that readers have a lot of love for Ken's stories because he has sold over 200,000 copies of his books, which is very exciting. And Ken is joining us today to talk about his decision to write full-time that he made fairly recently, what his experience has been so far, and any tips he has for others thinking about making that transition. So Ken, welcome to the Indie Author Podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I am very pleased to. So before we dive into a discussion about going full-time as a writer, just tell the listeners a little bit more about you and your books in your series.
Okay. I'm so bad about talking about me. I have a pretty common writer story that I've been doing it on and off for a while until 2013. I made the decision that I wanted to finally write the book I'd been kicking around for a while. And I told that story, and now I write other stories. Anything that I think is interesting, pretty much. And
all in the science fiction fantasy area, correct?
Yeah, now. That's what I'm doing. Yep.
So just give a brief description of the 4 series that you write.
Okay. The first series I wrote was called the Saphnarian Order series, which is an epic fantasy with a dash of science fiction in it. It's 4 books long. It basically starts with the main character from Earth that goes to a magical land, which is kind of like my teenage fantasy. So, I wrote that story. The other stories are more science fiction based. I found that I liked writing those stories better than epic fantasy, and fans resonated with those stories better than epic fantasy. So those would be more science fiction space opera books, and I have one called the Ascension series that I'm writing the final book in it now. It takes place about 30 years in the future, and essentially Earth is getting pulled into an intergalactic conflict, and we're completely unprepared, so it's fun. My most recent series is called the First Colony series. It takes place a few hundred years in the future, and where Earth is sending its first interstellar colony out, and while the colonists are traveling, the 60 light years away, they go to sleep for 200 years, and they wake up and they're not where they thought they would be, and there's no more Earth. So it's it has a lot of mystery, and my main character in that is a military elite officer who shouldn't have been in the colony in the first place. So it's a bit of a fish out of water type story, and like I said, it was really fun to write. So
that's great. And so last year you decided you were going to do that full time. What were you doing before? What was your day job before you made that decision?
Okay. I've been working in IT security for almost 20 years, and I'd spent the last 10 years at this one company. It's in that field, at least at that place, the layoffs were common. I've been through a few rounds where I made it through, and I just knew my number was eventually going to come up. So either I was going to have to go find another job or change careers. So my decision to go full-time, it was, even though I was working towards it, it came a little sooner than expected because I was selected to be laid off last spring. They told me my end date would be at the end of the summer, and so I was like, well, I'm at a spot now as far as book sales where it became a viable option to replace my salary. So I could talk more. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's the high level.
Okay. And 200,000 copies of books in 4 years is pretty extraordinary. We're not going to be delving too much into the promotional side of indie publishing here, but that's a very respectable accumulation of readers in a relatively short time.
Yeah.
Did you just give us a little bit of background on how you did that, because the fact that you had such a large following was obviously something that made it much easier for you to make the decision to go full-time than if you were still building that following.
Yeah. Essentially what happened was each series I wrote, I got a little bit better as far as writing and narrowing down on my target reader and giving them what they want. And one of the reasons, this is how I sold it to my wife to be full-time, is like, I have there's a progression of each series doing a little bit better and selling a little bit more books than the previous series over the course of the 4 years. And yeah, that's essentially what supported the decision. It wasn't like, I wrote one book and it was out of the park. I didn't smash it out of the park with the first book, although it did exceed my expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until I had already been releasing books for about 3 years that the money that was coming in was enough to take notice that this could replace the salary. So.
And I'm realizing that as I was thinking about this discussion, preparing for it, I was thinking mainly about the writing activities, but obviously if you're focusing on your writing full-time, you also have that extra time to focus on promotion. So how much time do you think you now spend percentage-wise between writing and promotion?
Writing is my top priority.
Mm-hmm.
The marketing stuff takes probably maybe 15% of my time. Mm-hmm. And I run ads through Amazon. I've done Facebook ads. I will delve into BookBub ads in the future. The landscape has changed even since I started, where it used to use certain services to help promote your books, like FreeBooksy, mm-hmm. where you run a promotion with them, and some of the other ones like eReader News Today. I've used over the course of the years. I don't use them so much anymore, but when I was starting, it did help to give a little bit of a burst and give you some exposure to readers. I mean, that's the one of the biggest hurdles is getting out in front of people, or getting mm-hmm. out in front of the right people who would be a good match for the type of story that you write.
And what made you decide to rely less on those services like FreeBooksy and so on?
I had more success running my own ads. Plus you can also exhaust the audience too. Mm-hmm. So, I was running maybe once a quarter, a discount and sending it to them, but eventually it was diminishing returns.
Okay.
Where I wouldn't get as many downloads, or it just wasn't at the time. It wasn't worth the cost of running the promotion.
Mm. And do you publish in print as well as ebook?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'm curious, I would guess that most of your sales are ebook. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
To
99%, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The family and friends like the print books, right?
Yeah, and I like them on my shelf.
Exactly.
I do sell. I do sell print books. There are still people who that's all they read on, and mm-hmm. they're willing to pay for them. But it's not a significant amount.
So one of the things that I think is interesting from a financial point of view for print books is it seems like the investment is higher. So you can make a pretty decent looking cover, or have someone make a pretty decent looking cover for an ebook. It's relatively easy. You don't have to worry about things like getting someone who understands spine width considerations and things like that. It's a more complicated formatting process, I think, to make a print book look really nice, the interior. So have you, now that you're relying strictly on the earnings from your writing, Have you had to rethink investments you make in the actual production of your books?
I will say the just on print book formatting, it's gotten a lot easier. Like I used to do the formatting. I learned how to do it myself. There's a lot of other authors sharing this is how they do the interior formatting for ebooks. And I used to do it through Scrivener, which is has a steep learning curve. And now I use Vellum on my Mac, and that makes it so easy where you can just put together a pretty decent format out there that looks good, whether it's ebook or print. But again, it's novel. It's just words on the page with some, you can have interesting chapter headings and make it look nice and stuff like that. So it's not as hard as it used to be.
Okay.
As far as production costs, when I decided that I wanted to do this full time, which was a few years ago, I decided that I had to emulate the author's success that I wanted. So that meant getting it professionally edited, getting it proofread, and having it covered. The other things I could do myself, which is the formatting. That's just the skill set that I acquired. But I'll never be a cover designer. But that's something I'll pay somebody else to do.
I think that that's such an important message, because one of the messages I try to carry forward about indie publishing, the reason I like to say indie rather than self-publishing, is self-publishing suggests that you're in it on your own.
Right.
And indie suggests a somewhat more business-like approach to it, and recognizing when you need to get other people involved in order to put out the best possible product. Have you...
One thing I noticed about the people who were doing well in this space had come from running a small business, and they had that mindset, and that's it's something I have now. I didn't have before, but now I do. Yeah.
Well, what I find, and I'm representing the still working a day job perspective on this, and what I appreciate about it is, one, my book sales are not 200,000, so I wouldn't be in a position to be looking at going full time anyway, but I like being able to make the upfront cost. So, the upfront cost for a cover design, for example, and not have to watch every penny, because I know I'll be able to still pay my rent even if I've paid someone else to do the cover design. And when I first started out, I thought I would try to build my sales and then pay for help with the proceeds, which I realized is sort of silly, because it's like if you wanted to open a restaurant, you wouldn't go about it saying, well, I'm going to scrape together the money to buy 2 pieces of bread and ham and cheese.
Right.
And that's going to cost me $1, and I'm going to sell it for $2, and then I'll have $1 and I can buy some napkins with it. You make the upfront investment. And so I think the benefit of getting started when you do still have another source of income is being able to make that upfront investment as you would in any business.
It's fun. It's fun being the hobbyist with potential, because there's no dependency on your writing income. You
Yes.
can be a little bit more experimental. Then I budget projects now, and I have what I call bread and butter projects. These I'm catering to my core audience, and I'll budget at least 1 or 2 projects that might be a little bit more experimental. That's how I'm tackling 2018. There are some advantages to being that part-time writer where you can experiment, and it's a good learning place, because learning on the fly is overrated.
Yeah.
When you have bills to pay. So,
Yes.
And you can't downsize to a 1-bedroom studio apartment, which I can't. So,
Right. So how frequently do you publish a book, and how are your books divided between the bread and butter books and the experimental books?
Well, last year I published 6 books. last year was a little bit different because I knew I was getting laid off, and I was going for a strategy of releasing new series close together because it would have a better impact than the months apart. So, in which it did. I learned that a couple years ago when I'd done it previously. I released 2 books close together, and the sales just built off of each other. So it's a strategy. It's extremely hard to do because writing books, paying for it's a lot of outlay of money because you pay for all the editing and proofreading, and I got my covers all done before, and there's very little until you put the book out there. You don't know how well it's going to do. I like the it's almost like synergistic, where you put the book out there and you reach the right readers and they read it. So I like that feedback loop to say they validate me, not an editor or anything. If my readers are happy, then I've done my job right. I think I've wandered from your question now.
Oh well, the other part of it was just, how do you split the bread and butter from the experimental? Is it like one bread and butter and one experimental, or?
Oh, yeah. Well, for this year, my release schedule will be about every 2 months, and I've left a couple of projects open at the end of the year. So my first half of the year will be in series that I've already established myself in, and one new series that caters to that audience. And then depending on how the sales of those books go will determine just how experimental I get at the end of the year. I write down like story ideas in a document, and and then I'll go back to it once a week, just to see which ones are worth fanning the flames to become an actual good premise. So I'm still putting that together.
Okay. It does seem like, if I look at your statistics, so 14 books over 4 series and more than 200,000 sold, it seems as if that's a recipe that would lend itself more easily to a full-time gig. The other one that I think is probably like that is romance, where you haven't sold 200,000 of one book, so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. You're spreading it over, and I would think that also it's easier to know for science fiction, fantasy, or for romance what your core audience is looking for, so you can deliver that in a sort of efficient way, as opposed to if you're doing literary fiction, and it's much more a crapshoot as to whether it's going to appeal to people. Does that resonate with you? Does that make sense to you?
Well, I think, all right. Well, one factor, having a good backlist helps your sales. So if you're committed to one particular genre, so science fiction, when I released a new series in the fall, it did really well, and those readers went and read my other science fiction series. Yep. So it had that kind of cascade effect. But for any genre that you write in, you should read in the genre, so you know the tropes that readers want from their books, and that's what you should be delivering too. Now when I think about it, used to be when I was like, I want to write this story because I think it's a really good story. Well, I still have that, but at the same time, I have a specific type of reader in mind that I want to entertain. I noticed that it's easier to market those books, write the blurb, all those things, that put a book together. Is having your target reader in mind to cater to.
And now that you're relying on your writing for your income, have you noticed any impact on your creative life? So when you have that idea that you think would be cool to pursue, but you sort of have to say no because it's not going to appeal to the core readers, what has that experience been like?
It's just prioritizing, you know. It just happens that the books that I write, that's my bread and butter stuff, I like to write anyway. Because if I didn't like to write it, that's going to show.
Yes.
It's going to bleed through. So there is that. In the end, I have a mortgage. So
yeah.
When I talk to other writers about this, and even when I made my own decision to do this, I clearly defined, what did I want out of this? And the first thing is to make a living and earn a certain dollar amount. And I fit the other creative pursuits in that. Like, I could still do the, if I want to write a book however I want it and not take, things like tropes and stories, and it, mixes genres, accept the fact that it might not sell as well as something else. Like my first series mixes science niche audience, but it'll never be a USA Today bestseller, But
right.
I continuously market that, and the book does that series does earn money each month because I take steps to put it in front of people to read. So.
And have you ever thought about pursuing traditional publishing, either instead of or in addition to indie publishing?
Yeah, I think the hybrid model is nice. I'm not pursuing anything. My mindset is the more I grow as far as a readership, the better my books do. That those opportunities will come to me. Much like audiobooks, like I don't produce my audiobooks. I use an audiobook publisher to do that.
Who do you use for that?
I have 2 series with Podium Publishing and 1 series with Audible Inc., which is the division for Amazon.
Okay.
So and those are coming out tentatively at the end of the month, so that'd be cool.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So, but traditional, it's like I wouldn't have any issue giving my print book rights away, but I would not give my ebook rights away because there's no way they can match the royalty. And if I project, well, this is what this series is going to earn me for the duration of the contract, they would have to pay me up front. Which I don't think is a good fit for either of us.
Yep.
But yeah, it would be something I would consider, but it's just not something I'm going to pursue in the immediate future.
All right. So what advice do you have, based on the experience you've had from going to the hobbyist with potential to the full-time writer, what advice would you offer to other people who are thinking about that decision?
Okay. This is when I made my own decision. This is the criteria I used: a proven track record of selling books and making a consistent income. So I track my sales each month. In my day job, I had to do what's called monthly metrics to prove that my service was delivering what the business needed. I do the same thing, but for myself now. So I have a proven track record that the books are selling and making money. Being able to market those books so sales remain consistent, and to be able to write books consistently. The other stuff, be able to measure success, and that means having it clearly defined. There's no way I could ask my wife to take this leap with me if I didn't have some concrete data to back up. Yeah, this is viable. We're not going to lose our house. I have 2 kids in high school. They're going to go to college. I'm not in that position where I'm going to really downsize my life at this point in time. So it's more pragmatic, my approach to this. The other thing would be and this is really practical, is to have a year full of savings before I would consider going full time. Because I see a lot of people who've done it too early, and this business is ups and downs, whereas you can have a few months that are not as great as some other months. You have, like, I'm able to write books in a consistent way where, yeah, I'm going to be able to deliver a new book, roughly every 60 days, and they'll sell relatively well to keep paying my mortgage. Now, it took me 4 years to work up to that point. I certainly wasn't doing that in the beginning. It was like one book every 7 months, know, and as I wrote more, I got better. I streamlined my process and it improved. Because I don't want my back against the wall financially. So, and I've read other, even traditional authors, when they made the jump to full time, is having that year worth of bills paid. So me and my wife work, so it's my half of the bills basically.
Yeah.
And so there's you avoid that tension. If I had, there are some people who lightning strikes at the first book that they write, and I think it's can be dangerously tempting.
Yes.
Because unless it really strikes where you suddenly become a 7-figure author, which would be awesome, but there's no guarantee that your next book is going to sell that well.
Yes.
And there's also no guarantee that you'll be able to write consistently or market. I just think the more practical approach is to have those things in a row, which takes time. It's a marathon, not a sprint, which is what a lot of people say. And to be successful, that's what I think you need to do. Because I see a lot of authors who they're there in a moment and then they're not here next year, and that's a shame.
I really like the business-like approach you're taking. I'm working on a nonfiction book. The working title, although this is a bit of a mouthful, is The Craft and the Voyage of the Indie Author, Practical Advice to Achieve Your Creative Goals. And I'm taking 20 plus years of project management experience, some in the IT world, and saying it's not as separate from the author journey as you think it is. You have to do that cost-benefit analysis to understand exactly the kinds of considerations that you're talking about.
Yeah, the whole planning out the year, that's new. I used to just do one project at a time, and I'm like, well, if I'm going to do this full time, certain things can overlap, and the other thing I'm keen to avoid is burnout. So I need some of that work-life balance. Like last year, I was putting in a lot of hours because I knew the end was imminent, and I didn't want another IT job. I wanted to, make a serious go at this. So.
Do you plan in time between books to have that downtime?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Good tip.
Well, I look at there's because my kids are in high school. I look at the time that they're off, and I plan around other people's vacation times, and where my wife works in the school district, so she's got summers off. So I'm trying to plan around that stuff, so we have that kind of time. And plus, I basically, what I took is I took the amount of vacation time I got at my old job and then said, I'm going to maintain this in my new job because that's the lifestyle I want. I don't want to have to work more, even though I love writing, but it can't be a 14-hour day, Monday through Saturday type of gig for me because that's not easy. So I do budget in some time off, and I do try to tweak my process to see what I can improve as far as writing and producing. Just because again, I know like at the end of last year, I was tired, man. My brain was tired. It took a lot for me to actually finish the last book I wrote.
because I was getting exhausted. So I was working to avoid that. But at the same time, I did put out 6 books, which was good.
Yeah, that's great. And I like the tip about keeping in mind that you've got to plan out both the work and the play.
Yeah.
To be able to optimize your work.
Yeah. Because otherwise you start taking days. And it's okay once in a while to take that mental health day, but if you budget it in, you won't feel as guilty about it.
That makes total sense to me. Well, this has been extremely helpful, Ken. Thank you for sharing all those tips. And why don't you tell our listeners where they can go to find out more about you and your books?
You can find out about me on my website at kenlozito.com. I put up there what I'm working on. It's got links to the books. I'm also on Amazon.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.